Libraries have always held a strange kind of power. They're more than just buildings lined with books. They're archives of thought, places where centuries of knowledge lie waiting to be uncovered. The idea that everything someone has ever learned, every truth ever discovered, could be written down and stored forever. It's intoxicating, isn't it? But knowledge has never been free. There's always a cost. Some prices are obvious. Hours spent poring over texts, sleepless nights lost to study. Others are less tangible, harder to see until it's too late. Knowledge shapes you, molds you, sometimes in ways you can't undo. I used to think libraries were safe, that they were places of light and learning. But I've come to understand something about knowledge. It's not always meant to be found. There are truths so vast, so consuming, that the human mind wasn't built to hold them. And there are places where those truths are kept, where books don't just inform, they demand. This story isn't about the libraries you know. It's about a different kind of library, a place that doesn't exist until you need it and vanishes the moment you leave. Its books don't sit idle on dusty shelves. They call to you, whispering promises of answers you didn't know you were searching for. And when you open them, they open you in return. I thought I could outsmart it. I thought I could take what I wanted and walk away. But knowledge, real knowledge, doesn't let you go. It stays with you, burrowing deep, until you're not sure who you are without it. If you ever find yourself standing in front of a door that shouldn't be there, don't go through it. But if you do, don't say you weren't warned. Some truths are better left unread. It began on a night like any other. I was alone on campus, the library long closed, the halls empty and silent. I had been searching for a quiet place to study, somewhere away from distractions and noise. The older buildings, forgotten by most students, seemed like a good choice. Their heavy doors and dim corridors always gave me a sense of calm. I wandered into one of these buildings, the air cool and still. As I passed the rows of closed doors, I noticed one that was slightly ajar. It caught my attention because I was certain it had been closed before. The room behind it was dark, but as I pushed it open, something flickered inside. What I saw made me hesitate. The space was vast, impossibly large for the building I thought I knew. Shelves stretched into the distance, packed with books that seemed to pulse faintly in the dim light. The room smelled of paper and something older, something alive. I stepped inside without thinking. The walls felt close, yet the space felt endless. My footsteps made no sound. It was as though the air itself was holding its breath, waiting. I reached for a book on the nearest shelf. Its cover was smooth, the title etched in letters I could not read. When I opened it, the words inside rearranged themselves, forming sentences I understood. I had only planned to glance, but the words held me there. They described things I could not imagine. Concepts that seemed too intricate, too perfect to exist in the world I knew. When I finally closed the book, I felt the loss of it immediately, as though it had taken something from me. Or perhaps I had left something behind. I placed the book back on the shelf and turned to leave, but I could not find the door. I walked between the rows, my pulse quickening, until the doorway appeared again, as if it had been waiting for me to notice it. I stepped out into the hallway, the cold air rushing back to me. The door was gone when I turned to look for it, and the hallway was silent once more. But the library stayed with me, and I knew I would return. I could not stop thinking about the library. It had carved itself into my thoughts, leaving an itch that I could not reach. The memory of that vast, endless room stayed with me, tugging at the corners of my mind. I had seen only one book, read only a handful of its words, but they felt like a secret I had been waiting to hear. The world outside seemed smaller now, quieter, as if it no longer held the answers I needed. It was 2 nights later when I returned. I told myself it was curiosity, but deep down, I knew it was something stronger. I wanted more. The old building was as I had left it, dark, empty, and cold. My footsteps echoed as I made my way down the hall, but the door was nowhere to be seen. I walked slower, my eyes scanning every inch of the walls. Just as doubt began to creep in, the door appeared. It was as if it had always been there, waiting for me to notice. This time, I pushed it open without hesitation. The room welcomed me with its soft, otherworldly glow. The air seemed warmer, heavier, like the space itself was alive. I walked to a shelf and ran my fingers along the spines of the books. They felt smooth, almost warm, as if they had been waiting for someone to touch them. I picked a book at random, its cover plain and unmarked. Inside, the words unfolded like a map, leading me through thoughts I had never dared to imagine. It explained a theory about memory and how it worked, how it could be sharpened, and even how it could be controlled. It was written with such clarity, such precision, that I felt my mind expand with every sentence. By the time I finished, I knew things I had never studied, never even heard of. It was as if the knowledge had always been mine, waiting for me to claim it. I left the library that night with my head buzzing. The concepts were alive in my mind, fitting themselves into the spaces where confusion used to live. The next day, I aced a test I had barely studied for, answering questions with a confidence I had never felt. My professor called it impressive. I called it something else. I returned to the library the following night. This time I chose a book that promised insight into human behavior. It described patterns and subtleties I had never noticed before. The way someone's breathing changes when they lie, the small movements that betray hesitation or fear. It was like stepping behind a curtain and seeing the mechanics of the world for the first time. The next day, I used what I had learned. I spoke to people differently, watching their reactions, choosing my words carefully. Conversations felt like games I could now win. I began to see opportunities where before there had only been uncertainty. My confidence grew, fueled by the knowledge I had taken. The library became my sanctuary. Each night, I returned to its glowing shelves, drawn to the promise of more. Every book opened gave me something new. Techniques to remember anything I read, methods to persuade even the most stubborn mind, ideas that felt too perfect to be real. I did not question where the knowledge came from. I did not wonder why the library had appeared to me. I only cared about what it could give. The world was opening before me, and I had the key. But with each book, the air in the library seemed heavier. The books felt warmer in my hands, almost pulsing. At times, I thought I heard faint movements in the distance, though I never saw anyone else. I dismissed it as my imagination. The library was mine now, and I would not let anything take it from me. The changes in my life came quickly. It was as if the knowledge had given me a new version of myself, one I barely recognized. I knew things I had no business knowing, could say the right words in every situation, and predict outcomes before they happened. My grades, once average at best, soared to the top of every class. Professors began calling on me for answers no one else could provide, and I gave them with ease. My peers looked at me differently now, with admiration or envy, but it didn't matter. I had their attention, and that was enough. Outside of academics, the knowledge worked even better. I understood people in ways I never had before. Conversations became predictable, their patterns clear and easy to navigate. I could steer them where I wanted, planting ideas and thoughts as though they were my own creations. People began gravitating toward me, drawn by a confidence I had never possessed. I found myself in the center of circles I had always watched from the edges, welcomed into spaces I never thought I belonged. Then there was her. She had been a quiet presence in my life for months, someone I admired from a distance. I had always assumed she was out of reach, someone who lived in a world too far from mine. But the knowledge changed that. It gave me the words to draw her closer, to make her laugh and lean in when we talked. I knew what she wanted to hear before she said it. It felt effortless, like the books had written the script for me. Before long, we were inseparable. She told me I understood her in ways no one else ever had, that talking to me felt like opening a door she had kept locked for years. I didn't tell her that every word I said was calculated, drawn from concepts and insights I had read in the library. I didn't tell her that I was building something between us, piece by piece, with knowledge I couldn't explain. It felt real enough, and that was all that mattered. Opportunities began appearing everywhere. Professors recommended me for projects and internships. My name was on lists I had never dreamed of being part of. My peers sought my advice, hanging on to my every word as though I had the answers to everything. In truth, I almost did. The books had given me tools I didn't fully understand but knew how to use. Life had never felt so easy, so perfectly aligned. Yet there were moments when the perfection felt hollow. I would sit in a crowded room, the buzz of conversation around me, and feel an odd stillness inside. Success had come so quickly that it felt detached, as if it wasn't mine at all. I ignored the feeling, brushing it away like a fly. I told myself that this was what I had always wanted, what I deserved. The library had opened the world to me, and I had simply walked in. I kept going back. Every night, the door appeared as if it had been waiting. Each book offered new secrets, deeper insights. I studied things I had never cared about before. History, philosophy, even obscure sciences. Everything I read seemed to fit somewhere, clicking into place in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I hadn't realized I was solving. My thoughts felt sharper, clearer, as though the books were rewriting the way my brain worked. But there were costs, small ones I barely noticed at first. But I told myself it didn't matter. Everything I had gained was worth it. The library had given me the life I had always wanted, and I wasn't about to give it up. The cracks in my perfect life continued. I noticed them in fleeting moments when the world around me felt out of sync. They were things I could easily explain away, and for a time I did. But they began to grow, spreading like hairline fractures in glass, until ignoring them became impossible. I started losing time. At first, it was subtle. Moments slipping away during conversations or while sitting in class. I would glance at the clock, certain I had only just looked at it, and find that hours had passed. It happened most often after I left the library. I would step into the hallway, the door disappearing behind me, and find that the night was almost over. My walks back to my dorm blurred in my memory, as though I were sleepwalking through them. The dreams came next. At night, my mind filled with fragments of things I could not name. I saw symbols that felt familiar but had no meaning. I heard words I did not recognize, their sounds sharp and cold. The dreams left me drained, my mornings heavy with a fatigue that clung to me no matter how much I slept. I told myself they were just the result of stress, of too many late nights and too little rest. But the feeling that lingered in my chest told me otherwise. There were other changes too. My thoughts felt sharper, quicker, but they moved in ways that no longer felt like mine. I would sit in silence and feel them turning, spiraling into patterns I couldn't control. They pulled at memories I didn't know I had, creating connections that felt foreign. It was as though my mind had become a puzzle, one that someone else was solving piece by piece. People began to notice. My friends, once drawn to my charm and confidence, started to pull away. They said I seemed distracted, distant, as though I were only half present when we spoke. My words, which had once felt like tools I could wield with precision, now carried a weight I couldn't explain. Conversations felt hollow, each one leaving me emptier than the last. Even she noticed. Her eyes would linger on me when I spoke, searching for something that wasn't there. She told me I had changed, that the connection we had once shared felt strained. I wanted to tell her the truth, to explain what I had done and why. But every time I opened my mouth, the words stopped short. The library had given me the knowledge to build her trust, but it had taken something else in return. I could not tell her that I no longer knew how to love her. The library itself began to feel different. The warm glow that had once welcomed me now felt oppressive, its light too bright and too dim all at once. The shelves seemed taller, the air heavier, as though the space had grown in ways I couldn't see. The books, once smooth and inviting, felt rough in my hands. I told myself it was my imagination, that nothing had changed but me. But the feeling stayed with me, growing stronger each time I entered. The library no longer felt like a gift. It felt like a trap, one I had walked into willingly, and yet I could not stop going back. The knowledge called to me, pulling me deeper into its endless shelves, and I could not resist. The night I found the warning, I almost didn't go to the library. My body felt heavy, my thoughts scattered, and my chest carried an unease I couldn't place. But the pull of the library was stronger. It was always stronger. By now, it had become part of my life, a ritual I couldn't abandon. So I left my dorm and made my way to the building, the halls dark and silent as they always were. The door appeared as if it had been waiting for me, its edges glowing faintly in the still air. Inside, the library felt colder than usual. The air was thick, pressing against my skin as I walked among the shelves. I passed row after row, my eyes scanning the spines of books I hadn't seen before. Then I noticed it. A book unlike the others. Its cover was black, its surface worn and cracked as though it had been handled countless times. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly, and opened it. The words inside were different. They did not explain theories or offer insights. They were warnings, etched in sharp, deliberate sentences. They spoke of a price, of the toll knowledge demands. They described people who had come before me, drawn to the library as I had been, and the fates they could not escape. The more I read, the more my chest tightened. The words painted a picture I did not want to see. It was of minds unraveling, lives hollowed out by truths too vast to bear. One passage stayed with me. It spoke of a line that must not be crossed, of a point where knowledge ceases to enlighten and begins to consume. It warned that those who pushed too far would lose themselves, becoming part of the library forever. I closed the book, my pulse racing, and placed it back on the shelf. The weight of its words clung to me as I turned to leave. But I did not leave. I stayed, standing between the shelves, the warning ringing in my mind. My eyes drifted to the rows of books around me, each one promising something greater, something more. The pull was stronger than ever, a voice in my thoughts urging me to continue. The warning had left a knot of fear in my chest, but it wasn't enough to stop me. I told myself it was just a story, a relic of someone else's imagination. It couldn't apply to me. I reached for another book, ignoring the tension in my hands. The pages unfolded before me, filled with answers to questions I had never thought to ask. The warning faded as the knowledge poured into me, lighting up parts of my mind I hadn't known existed. It felt intoxicating, electric, and I wanted more. I told myself I would stop after one more book, then another, then another. The night stretched on as I devoured the words, each one pulling me deeper into the library's endless maze. The warning echoed faintly in the back of my mind, but I drowned it out with the thrill of discovery. I told myself I could control it, that I was different from the others. I believed it, because I wanted to believe it. When I finally left, the door behind me disappeared as it always did. The world outside felt distant, muted, as though I had stepped into the wrong version of it. I walked back to my dorm, my mind filled with the knowledge I had gained. The warning lingered at the edges of my thoughts, a faint whisper I refused to acknowledge. I didn't know it then, but the line I had crossed was already behind me. The cracks in my life widened, spreading faster than I could keep up. I told myself the knowledge was worth it, that the changes I felt were temporary, but deep down, I knew the truth. The library had given me everything I wanted, but it was taking something in return. I just couldn't see what it was, not yet. At night, the dreams grew worse. I saw the library in fragments, its shelves towering above me, their edges stretching into darkness. The books called to me, their words imprinted on my mind even after I woke. I began to wonder if I was truly awake, or if the library had followed me into my reality. It didn't feel like a place anymore. It felt like a part of me, a presence I couldn't escape. The toll was more than just emotional. My body began to suffer. My hands trembled, my chest felt tight, and my vision blurred at the edges. My thoughts, once sharp and clear, began to spiral. The knowledge I had gained twisted into something else, fragments of ideas I couldn't hold on to. They spun in my mind, too fast to follow, like a puzzle I could no longer solve. My successes began to unravel. Professors who once praised me started to question how I had achieved so much so quickly. They looked at me with suspicion, their admiration turning into doubt. The people who had once been drawn to me now kept their distance. Even the opportunities I had earned felt empty, as though they didn't belong to me. The knowledge itself started to change. When I returned to the library, the books felt heavier in my hands. The words blurred, their meanings harder to grasp. I read them anyway, desperate for answers, but they left me feeling more lost than before. The air in the library grew thick, pressing against me as if the space itself was warning me to stop. I ignored it. I couldn't stop. The knowledge was the only thing I had left. I kept going back night after night, even as my life fell apart. Each time I told myself it would be the last, but the pull was too strong. The library had become my only constant, the only thing that felt real. One night, I found another book one couldn't resist. Its cover was blank, its edges worn smooth. I opened it, and the words inside were different from anything I had read before. They spoke of a cost I had not considered, a price I had already begun to pay. The knowledge was not mine. It was borrowed, and the library would take it back, along with everything else it had given me. The book described my life with unnerving precision. The rise, the success, the unraveling. It ended with a passage that felt like a knife twisting in my chest. It said the knowledge would consume me, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. I closed the book, my hands shaking, but the words stayed with me, carved into my thoughts. For the first time, I felt true fear. I had spent so long chasing the knowledge that I hadn't stopped to see what it was taking. Now I could feel it slipping away. My mind, my body, my life. The library had given me everything I thought I wanted, but it was leaving me with nothing. I tried to leave that night, but the door didn't appear. I wandered the shelves, my pulse racing, as the air grew colder around me. I felt the weight of the library pressing in, its presence suffocating. When I finally found the door, I stumbled through it, gasping for air. I didn't go back the next night, or the night after that. But the library stayed with me, its presence a constant whisper in my mind. I could feel it pulling at me, waiting for me to return, and deep down I knew I would. I stayed away from the library as long as I could, but it never truly left me. It lingered in the corners of my thoughts, a weight I couldn't shake. Even as I tried to rebuild my life, the knowledge I had gained haunted me. It had become a part of me, threading itself through my mind like roots in soil. Every success, every conversation, every fleeting moment of triumph reminded me of the library's influence. Nothing felt real anymore. The dreams grew worse. They weren't just fragments now. They were vivid, consuming. I would see the shelves stretching endlessly, their spines glowing faintly in the dark. The books whispered promises of answers, of truths too vast for the waking world. I would wake in a cold sweat. The images burned into my mind. I told myself I was done with the library, that I wouldn't return, but the pull was always there. It wasn't a choice anymore. It was a need. When I finally gave in, the door appeared as if it had been waiting for me. The air inside the library felt different this time, colder and heavier, like it had been holding its breath. The shelves seemed taller, the books darker, their spines unreadable. I walked slowly, my footsteps silent on the endless floor. I told myself I would find something to help, something to fix what the knowledge had broken. That was when I saw it. A single book stood apart, resting on a pedestal at the end of an empty aisle. Its cover was smooth and black, with no title, no markings. It radiated a presence I couldn't ignore, drawing me forward with every step. I reached for it, my hand trembling as my fingers brushed the surface. The air around me grew still, as if the library itself was waiting. When I opened the book, the words inside seemed to ripple, shifting and settling as though they were alive. They spoke of truths I couldn't fathom, knowledge that stretched beyond anything I had read before. The concepts were vast, overwhelming, filling my mind with a clarity that felt like drowning. It was not just knowledge, it was understanding. It was the foundation of everything, the answers to questions I hadn't known to ask. The book revealed things I should not have seen. It showed the threads that wove the universe together, the patterns that dictated life and death. It spoke of the library itself, a place that existed beyond time, feeding on the minds of those who sought its secrets. It showed me the cost of its knowledge, the lives it had consumed, the souls it had hollowed out. Then it showed me my place among them. I closed the book, my chest tight, my breath shallow. The weight of what I had read pressed against me, crushing and relentless. My hands shook as I placed the book back on the pedestal, but its presence remained with me. I turned to leave, but the library seemed to shift around me, its shelves closing in, its air colder than before. When I found the door, I stumbled through it, collapsing onto the cold floor of the hallway. The building was silent, its air still and heavy. The door disappeared behind me, leaving only the faint scent of paper and dust. I lay there for a long time, my thoughts spinning, my chest tight with the weight of the knowledge I had taken. The book had shown me everything, but it had taken something in return. I could feel it slipping away. The pieces of myself I had left behind in the library's endless maze. And deep down, I knew it wasn't done with me. I tried to run from what I had seen, but the knowledge followed me. It wasn't just in my thoughts anymore. It was in my dreams, in my reflection, in the way the world seemed to tilt slightly, as though reality itself had been warped. Nothing felt stable. The life I had built with the library's secrets began to collapse around me, piece by piece. The people closest to me were the first to notice. She looked at me now with fear, her warmth replaced by a quiet distance. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of something unspoken, as though she knew there was no saving me. My professors, once impressed by my abilities, began questioning how I had come so far, so quickly. Their skepticism grew louder, their words cutting deeper, until the praise I had once craved turned into whispers of doubt. Even my body betrayed me. My hands trembled constantly, my breath shallow and uneven. The smallest sound startled me, jolting me from my thoughts. My chest ached with a heaviness I couldn't explain, as though the library's weight still pressed against me. But the worst was my mind. My thoughts no longer felt like my own. They moved in spirals, fracturing and reforming into patterns I didn't understand. I would lose myself for hours, staring into space, as the knowledge churned in my head, unstoppable and relentless. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that I couldn't. But the library called to me, pulling at the edges of my thoughts, its presence a constant pressure I could not escape. The door began appearing everywhere. In hallways, in classrooms, even in my dreams. No matter where I went, it was there, waiting for me to return. And every time, I felt my resolve weaken. On the final night, I gave in. The door was there, faintly glowing, its edges sharp against the dim light of the hall. I stepped through it, my chest tight with dread, and found the library waiting. The air was heavier now, thick and cold, and the shelves seemed darker, their spines unreadable. The books radiated a presence I could feel in my bones, their knowledge pressing against me like a tide. I walked deeper than I ever had before, past rows of shelves that stretched endlessly into the dark. The space felt alive, its walls breathing, its silence deafening. At the end of the aisle, I saw the book that had shown me everything. It sat on the same pedestal, its black cover smooth and featureless, its presence undeniable. My hands trembled as I reached for it, my chest tight with a fear I couldn't name. When I opened it, the words poured into me like a flood. They were not just sentences. They were truths, vast and infinite, consuming every corner of my mind. They showed me the library's purpose, its endless hunger for those who sought its secrets. They showed me the lives it had taken, the minds it had hollowed out. And then they showed me myself. I saw my future written in its pages, my fate sealed by the choices I had made. The knowledge I had taken had been borrowed, and the library would take it back, along with everything it had given me. The book's final words burned into my thoughts, clear and inescapable. You are not the first. You will not be the last. The shelves around me began to shift, their edges blurring as the library closed in. The air grew colder, pressing against me like a weight, as though the space itself was rejecting me. I stumbled back, the book falling from my hands, and turned to run. The shelves stretched endlessly, their rows twisting into a maze I could not escape. When I found the door, it was barely there, its edges faint and flickering. I threw myself through it, collapsing onto the cold floor of the hallway. The door disappeared behind me, leaving only the silence of the empty building. I lay there for a long time, my chest heaving, my mind spinning with the weight of what I had seen. The library had shown me everything. It had given me the answers I sought, but it had taken more than I could ever understand. I was not free of it. I never would be. I stopped going to class. There was no point. The knowledge I had gained had already unraveled the structure of my life, leaving nothing to build upon. I spent my days staring out the window of my dorm, watching the world move without me. The sky looked different now, as though I could see the mechanics behind it, the gears turning beneath its surface. I didn't belong in it anymore. I was an observer, not a participant. The door hasn't appeared again, not in the waking world. But I know it's waiting for me, just as I am waiting for it. The library doesn't let its creations go. I am its creation now, shaped by its secrets, hollowed by its truths. The part of me that resisted is gone, burned away by the weight of what I have seen. I sit here now, staring at the walls of my room, my chest empty, my thoughts quiet. I don't feel fear or regret. I don't feel anything. I know the library will call me back when it is ready. And when it does, I will go. Not because I want to. Not because I need to. But because there is nothing left of me to refuse. This story couldn't have happened without the lovely supporters you see on screen. If you enjoyed it and want more creepy tales, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated. If you'd like to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, consider joining my Patreon. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one. Stay safe, and beware of the shadows.